I've just set up a piece of 5/8 silver steel, and it's called 01 tool steel in the States, I believe, in the lathe. I've checked to make sure it's running concentrically, which it is. And I'm going to take this down to 1/2 inch, and then I'll swap it round, hold that in a collet, hold the 1/2 inch section in the collet with a little bit of run out room, and then the rest of it I will then screw cut 10 TPI, exactly the same as I have done the lead screw or the feed screw, and then some other machining, and that will hopefully make a tap. I can't get anything else crossed, otherwise I'll fall over. So let's take this down. Let's do a quick finish is okay. $595, $596, $597, well, 5974, so I'll take that. It's within a tenth of what the readout's giving me. It's not the best feed rate, I know, but it means I don't have to play around with the settings for 10 TPI. A little bit on the warm side. 529, yep. Spot on. Okay. Pleased with that. That's a nice little finish on that. Let's just round that corner off. So explain where I am. And I forgot to get the video running the last time because I was more interested in just getting it done. So I've put the silver steel in, I've centered both the ends, I've also made sure that the collet chuck is running true, which it is. I've then used the taper turning attachment and I've set it on 2 degrees, and I've gone from 0.5 or ½ inch at this end, and I've left a 3/4 inch section at ½ inch, and I've taper cut it up to that point there where it's come out at the 0.625 section. I'm going to leave an inch of 5/8 bar there, and if you can see it on here, I've marked up with a pen. I'm going to relieve that back to ½ an inch there, and then I'm going to do the same again, 2 degree cut up to here, leave an inch of 5/8. And what I'll then do is I'll do 2 things. I will cut the thread full form all the way along, and then I'll do additional cuts at this end to thin it down. So it'll taper into full depth, but at this end, the first end that goes through will also be thinned down, so you won't get as much pressure on there, and hopefully that will allow it to cut. And thank you for Brandon for showing that little thing on here on your inheritance machining page. So that's where we are at the moment. I have a small one running around outside, so I can't do anything else in here currently. I'm going to try and do it tomorrow morning. I'll see you soon. Let's do something a bit different with this. Idiot, idiot, idiot. So we're now cutting the taper. I'm going to do it in one pass because I'm using the steady to try and stabilise it, and I can't do that on the taper. I'm just hoping that it behaves itself as it comes into the main part of the cut here. Okay, that's the taper cut. So the next bit, I'm going to release the taper turning attachment so that I'm not taper cutting anymore. I'm then going to come along here and put the relief at the end of the thickest part of the thread for the cutting tool to run into, and also when I'm using it to cut the thread, it will drop down, so it will drop out of cut. So that's the next bit. So I'm more or less set up to do that. I will just use this tool. So that will be that. So let's release the taper turning attachment from the back here. That's up. That's loose. Right, that's in there. Now I need to find where that has gone, which I'll do in a few minutes. And I'll just crack on and do some of this. Right, let's bring that down to here. Let's speed that up a little bit. 425. that. I'm going to need to buy a couple of new bolts for this, I think. They look like they are well past their best. So we'll just crack on and do some of that. I'm running at 175 RPM, I'm using the Angest unit, and if I can swing you down a little, I'll show you what I've done here, because I was finding a few little problems with Angest, and it's nothing to do with the unit itself, but it's to do with me. And I found on a couple of occasions I'd almost engaged the feed, and what I've done, I've just literally caught the top edge of the slot. So as I pushed that down, it immediately started moving, but it hadn't engaged, which was a bit of a nightmare. So what I've done is I've marked out the engagement points and where it needs to be, and there's 4 of them on here. So I've just put a paint pen, 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's a little mark there, which I know when those are in that point, I can put my hand on here, it will not engage until it gets past there, when it will drop straight in. And that seems to have sorted the issue out. But as you can see, I've got my threads coming up on here now. I'm using a little bit of lubricant. My friends at Anglia Bearings, stick that on there. So I'm not running particularly quickly. I forget how quick the Angest says I can do it, but it's something ridiculous. It's about 600 RPM. But it's quite coarse thread, so I'm going reasonably smoothly, because it's also quite a large gap between this bit and that bit, and I don't want to push the centre away too much. I suppose the option I could have would be to move that further back in the chuck. That's an option, but I don't want to go down that route. Taking a spring cut. shortly. On 12. On 14. On 15. Let's take another run through 115. Take that in. There. Drop that down a little bit, I think. Drop that to 320. Take another thou off. that's quite a lot thinner there now than that end. So I'm going to consider the turning side of this now done. Let's give that a quick blast. I'm going to get the tool and just take that a little bit down there. And then it's going to be milling.
Slightly deeper than I expected.
So I thought I hadn't left enough at the end here.
Let's move that up a bit, it's gone slightly down.
Suddenly realised I hadn't quite left enough gap there to go right the way through the nut. So I've had to put a little extra bit cut down. So I'll just tidy that up with some emery. Okay, that'll do us. So what do we got here? Front end just under ½ inch. Moving back, we've got a 2-degree taper with the 10 TPI ACME thread to a blank section in the middle, and then another down to ½ inch again, and then another 2-degree taper up to there, and then we've got about 1 inch of parallel thread, and then it comes out of that into a ½ inch reduced section that will go through the centre of the nuts. Right, so the next thing is going to be get this over to the mill, and I've got to start to mill the cutting edges on here, and I need to think which side I need to put them so that it makes a left hand thread cutting tap, not the other way round. I'll come back to you at a later stage. Well, I put this coat on, not because it's cold, because it's not. We're now into meteorological summer as of 2 days ago in the UK. So of course this morning it was throwing it down with rain. The reason I've got this on is swarf. Because I'm using an end mill. It's a 3 flute 10 mil, and I'm going to cut a slot in there. It's one of 4. Now the way I've set this up is that I've touched off on the top here, and I know that's 5/8 or 625, so halfway is 3125, but I've dropped it down 375 because I want to cut below centre height so that it's cutting there, so when you get to centre it's actually lifted up and I will have a cutting edge on it rather than square. I am trying to think, it is a left hand tap, so it's going that way, so the cutting edge needs to be on this side. yeah, I don't want to get that one wrong. I'm set at 970 RPM, so I'm going to go slowly, and when I will finish it will just be going into these areas here, and then I'll mark off my depth at 0 and I know to go back to that. So let's see what happens. Let's tighten up some of these slides. And what I think I will do, I'll come over here, I'll turn that on, I'll turn that off for a second. I'll take the pin out on the back gear. This is right on the limit of what I can do. End of cut would be here, and I'm finishing there, so I'm about an inch inside, and end of cut. Well, that's the setup to heat up the tap. I've built up a surround using some fire brick on top of my welding unit. I've got a loop of wire around the top, around the bar. That's holding it just off the base, so I can get that up and down there. And then right up beside me, I've got a bin. Well, what I thought I'd do is I'd give a bit of a try here. I'm just putting the tap through the existing feed nut, and this is the tap I've just made for the new feed screw and feed nut, and it's actually just running through and very slightly cleaning up the burrs that have been rolled over in the nut. So that's, I'm quite pleased with that. That means that I've actually made a tap for the new nut, which is exactly the right size for the old one. So that's a good sign. That's a good sign. So now, what will be interesting, having just cleaned out that nut, is to go and try it on the new feed screw, which is nearly there. That's one half of the anti-backlash nut, and that's the original nut, and that's the new feed screw, and that goes through. A little bit of drag on it, but not a lot. So I'm quite pleased with that. That means that my old nuts are usable with my new feed screw. Yay! Right, now I've got a little bit of a problem at this end, in that one of these is very slightly wider than it needs to be, so I've got to take about 1/10 thou off of that. So that's going to be a little bit of a file job. So I'll be back once I've done that and get that fitted. Well, I can say I'm just a bit pleased with that, because that means that the lead screw or the feed screw I've made is exactly the same as the original, less the wear. These are the original nuts. I've just literally run the tap I've made through there to clean up the threads, so that gives me two good points. One is that the feed screw is exactly the same as the old one, but without, as I said, but without the wear. The second thing is that the tap I've made, I've now proven is absolutely correct and matches the new feed screw that I've manufactured as well. So I'm nicely confident here that I've got two good things. One is I can put this back together using the original feed screw nuts, even if only temporarily. But secondly, I know that when I make the new ones and use the tap I've made, that will work correctly as well. So yeah, I'm pleased with that. Now I've just got to sort out the little issue at this end to make sure the splines fit. They're trying to go in, but there's just one of these, for some reason, perhaps my Chinese hex block isn't as accurate as it should be, it won't go home. So I need to just sort that out, and I've measured that, and I'm about 1/5 hour side out, so I just need to take that back a little bit. So if I undo my new screw from my old nuts, I can crack on a little. Okay, let's try this in here. Okay. That's the new one. That's the old one. So they're both going down exactly the same distance. That's good. I'll come back in a second. One of the more concerning things with this feed screw, it says, trying to put it so it can be visible, is this lovely spline at the end here. Now these slots are nominally 1/8 of an inch or 0.125 wide, but they're not quite. And my first attempt at fitting this wasn't quite the success I hoped for. It nearly went in, very nearly went in. So when I very carefully measured this, I found that obviously due to a little bit of vibration in the setup, it was a little bit less than 100% parallel all the way down. And a couple of these upstanding parts of the spline were in the middle a little bit wider than they were at the end. So thankfully a number of years ago I bought some riffler files, and these are just under 1/8 inch wide, and they fit beautifully down there. And I've just spent a little time on the bench just doing some fitting work, and the end result is, and I found there is one area that fits better than the other. That can go in there, have a little bit of a wriggle, and that will slide very nicely in and out. So that will do that. No plate, no rock, and it sits in there nice and tight. Having put these together, the original nuts here will actually work on that feed screw, but these are badly worn. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some very careful measuring, get all the dimensions off of here, and then I can look to finish making the new ones.